Welcome friends. This video is about important definitions in Indian Contract Act 1872 with explanations. So let's begin. Our first definition is about the proposal section 2A. Section 2A of the Indian Contract Act 1872 defines a proposal or offer like this: when one person signifies to another his willingness to do or to abstain from doing anything with a view to obtaining the assent of that other to such act or abstinence, he is said to make a proposal. So, what it means? A proposal is when someone expresses their intention to do something or not to do something and want the another person to agree to this intention. The key here is that the person making the proposal is looking for the another person's agreement or consent to their proposed action or inactions. So let's just break it down. Signifies to another. It means the person making the proposal communicates their intention to another person. Next one is willingness to do or to abstain from doing. That means the proposal involves a willingness to either perform a certain action or refrain from performing it. Next one is obtaining the assent. The proposal seeks the other person's approval or agreement to this action or inaction. Next one is acceptance, section 2, subsection B, definition. When the person to whom the proposal is made signifies his assent thereto, the proposal is said to be accepted. A proposal, when accepted, becomes a promise. Acceptance, what it means. Acceptance happens when the person who receives the proposal agrees to the terms laid down in it. This means they express their consent or agreement to what was proposed. Process. For a proposal to be considered accepted, the person must clearly agree to the exact terms of the proposal. This agreement should be communicated to the person who made the proposal. Proposal becomes a promise when, once the proposal is accepted, it turns into a promise. A promise is a commitment that one party will do or refrain from doing something as agreed upon in the proposal. Next one is a promiser and promisee, section 2, subsection C. Definitions. First one is a promiser. Definition of promiser: the person who makes a proposal offer is called the promiser. This is the individual who expresses their willingness to do something or refrain from doing something with the intention of getting the other party's agreement. Example: if A offered to sell their car to B for 50,000 rupees, A is the promiser. A is proposing to sell the car and is waiting for B's acceptance. Next one is the promise. Definition of promise: the person who accepts the proposal is called promisee. This is the individual who agrees to the terms of the proposal made by the promiser. Once they accept the proposal, the terms become a binding promise. Example for this: if B agrees to buy the car from A for 50,000 rupees, B is the promisee. B is accepting A's offer and agreeing to the terms. Next one is a consideration, section 2, subsection D. Definition of consideration: when, at the desire of the promiser, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing, or does or abstain from doing, or promises to do or to abstain from doing something, such act or abstinence or promise is called as a consideration for the promise. Let's explain what is the consideration. A consideration is what one party gives or agrees to give in exchange for a promise made by another party. It's essentially the value that is exchanged between the parties involved in a contract. It can be an act, an abstinence. Abstinence means refraining from doing something, or a promise to do or not to do something. A desire of the promiser. The promiser, the person making the promise, must desire or request the action or promise from the promisee, the person receiving the promise. Act or abstinence, the promisee or someone else performs an action, refrains from doing something, or promises to do or not to do something as requested by the promiser. Examples examples of the act scenario: a promise to pay A promise to pay B 5,000 if B paints A's house. Consideration: B painting the house is the consideration for A's promise to pay 5,000. Example: abstinence. A promises A promises to pay B 2,000 if B agrees not to compete with A's business for a year. Consideration: B's agreement to abstain from competing in the consideration for A's promise to pay 2,000. Example of a promise: A promises to give B 1,000 rupees if B promises to clean A's car. Consideration: B's promise to clean the car is the consideration for A's promise to pay 1,000 rupees. Next one is agreement. Section 2, subsection E, definition of agreement. Every promise and every set of promises forming the consideration for each other is an agreement. Let's understand the definition. An agreement arises when one promise is given in exchange for another promise. In other words, if one party makes a promise and the other party agrees to provide something in return, their promises together form an agreement. Both promises must be considered in relation to each other. For example, if A promises to deliver a product and B promises to pay for that product, their promises are mutual consideration and together form an agreement. Promises: each party must make a promise to do something or not to do something. These promises must be linked where each promise serves as a consideration for the other. Mutual consideration: the promises need to be mutually considered. That is, one promise should be in exchange for the another. Examples Example of a simple agreement: A promises to sell a book to B for 500 rupees and B promises to pay 500 to A for the book. Here, A's promise to sell the book and B's promise to pay 500 rupees form an agreement. Each promise serves as a consideration for the other. Example of the service agreement: A promises to paint B's house and B promises to pay A 5,000 for this service. A's promise to paint and B's promise to pay form an agreement. Each promise act as a consideration for the other. Next one is the reciprocal promises. Section 2, subsection F. Definition of reciprocal promise: promises which forms the consideration or part of the consideration for each other are called reciprocal promises. Let's understand the reciprocal promises. Reciprocal promise: these are promises made by each party in a contract that serve as a consideration for each other. Each promise is dependent on the other, meaning they are mutual and linked. Characteristics of reciprocal promises: first one is the mutual exchange. Each promise is given in exchange for the other. For instance, one party promises to do something and the other party makes a promise that serves as a consideration for the first promise. Dependence: the fulfillment of the one promise is dependent on the other promise being fulfilled. Example of the reciprocal promise. A agrees to sell a car to B for 50,000 and B agrees to buy the car for A for 50,000. Reciprocal promises. A's promise to deliver the car, B's promise to pay the 50,000 rupees. Here, A's promise to deliver the car is the consideration for B's promise to pay, and B's promise to pay is the consideration for A's promise to deliver the car. Both promises are reciprocal. Example in a service agreement. A promises to repair B's laptop and B promises to pay a 1000 rupees for the repair. Here, A's promise to repair the laptop and B's promise is to pay 1000 rupees. In this case, A's promise is given in the exchange for the B's promise and vice versa. Next one is void agreement. Section 2, subsection G, definition of void agreement. An agreement not enforceable by law is said to be void. Let's understand the void agreements. A void agreement is one that lacks legal validity and cannot be enforced by the law. Essentially, it is an agreement that is legally unenforceable from the moment it is made. A reason for the void agreement. First one is illegal purpose. The agreement involves illegal activities or purposes. Next one is the lack of essentials. It may lack essential element required for a valid contract such as the consideration, consent, or capacity. Third one is uncertainty. The terms of the agreement are too vague or uncertain to be enforced. Next one is impossible performance. The terms of the agreement are such that the performance is impossible. Example of an illegal agreement. A and B agrees to commit a crime together, such as robbing a bank. Void agreement. This agreement is void because it involves the illegal activity and no legal actions can be taken to enforce it. Example of a contract with impossible terms. A agrees to sell B a car that is already destroyed. The agreement is void because it involves an impossible performance, selling a non-existent car. Example of a contract lacking consideration. A promises to give B a gift without any written promise or consideration. While a gift itself isn't necessarily void, if the agreement is framed as a contractual obligation without the consideration, it can be considered void for lack of consideration. Next one is the contract, section 2, subsection H. Definition of the contract. An agreement enforceable by law is a contract. Let's understand what is contract. A contract is a legally binding agreement between two or more parties. It is enforceable by law, meaning that if one party does not fulfill their part of the agreement, the other party can seek legal remedy. Essential elements of a contract. For an agreement to be considered a contract, it must meet a certain essential agreement. Like first one is offer and acceptance. There must be a clear offer by one party and an acceptance by the other. Next one is the consideration. There must be something of value exchange between the parties. Mutual consent. Both parties must agree to the terms willingly and without any duress, misrepresentation, or mistake. Next one is the capacity. The parties must have the legal capacity to enter into the contract. Example, they must be of sound mind and not minors. Next one is the legality of the purpose. The contract purpose must be a lawful. Agreements involving illegal activities are not considered contract. Next one is the enforceability. An agreement becomes a contract when it meets all the legal requirements and is enforceable by law. This means that the terms of the agreement can be upheld in a court of law if one party fails to perform their obligations. Examples of a simple contract. A agrees to sell B a car for 50,000 rupees and B agrees to pay 50,000 rupees for the car. This agreement is a contract because it involves a clear offer and acceptance, consideration, the car and the money, the mutual consent capacity, and a legal purpose. Example of a service contract. A hires B to repair a house for 10,000. B agrees to perform the repair work and agrees to pay, and A agrees to pay 10,000 rupees. This is contract because it satisfies all the necessary elements: a clear offer and acceptance, consideration, mutual consent, and legal purpose. Next one is the voidable contract, section 2, subsection I, definition of voidable contract. An agreement which is enforceable by law at the option of one or more of the parties thereto, but not at the option of the other or others, is a voidable contract. Understanding the voidable contract. A voidable contract is a type of agreement that is valid and enforceable by the law, but only at the option of the one or more parties. This means that while the contract can be enforced by the parties who are not seeking to void it, it can be set aside by those who have the right to do so. Effect of the voidability at the option of the affected party. The party who is entitled to void the contract can choose to either affirm it will continue or void, cancel the agreement. Enforceability. Until the contract is voided, it remains enforceable. If the affected party decide to void it, the contract is no longer enforceable. Void contract. Section 2, subsection J, definition. A contract which ceases to be enforceable by the law becomes void when it ceases to be enforceable. Understanding a void contract. A void contract is one that is not legally enforceable from the outset or becomes unenforceable due to the changes in circumstances. It lacks legal validity, meaning that it cannot be enforced by the law and has no legal effect. When a contract becomes void. First one is initial voidness. Some contracts are void from the beginning if they involve illegal activity or lack essential elements required for the validity. Next one is subsequent voidness. Voidness. A contract can also become a void if it ceases to meet the requirement for the enforceability during its performance. For example, if a contract becomes impossible to perform due to unforeseen event, it may become void. Example of an initially void contract. A and B agrees to a contract where A will perform an illegal act. Example, A agrees to smuggle goods. This contract is a void from the beginning because it involves illegal activity and cannot be enforced. Next one, example of the contract becoming void due to impossibility. A agrees to deliver a specific item to B. If the item is destroyed before the delivery due to a natural disaster, the contract becomes impossible to perform. The contract becomes void when it ceases to be enforceable because the performance of the contract becomes impossible. Example of the contract becoming void due to change in the law. A and B enter into a contract that complies with the existing laws. If a new law is enacted making the contract terms illegal, the contract will become void. The contract ceases to be enforceable once it is no longer compliant with the law. Thank you. This is the end of this video.